What would you do if you were the president of a major New York banking house and people and companies were suddenly banging on your door, clamoring to pull their money out because of some of the shenanigans that you engaged in? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today with the creation of the United States Federal Reserve System. It sure is hard to believe that one company or one person could be responsible for the creation of the Federal Reserve System. Well, that would be a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of hyperbole, because there were people that were concerned as the United States economy grew into the 20th century that financial panics and financial problems would become potentially more severe due to just the scale of banking, the scale of population, and things like that. Clearly, there was something better needed. So it's not like some people didn't dream of the creation of some central banking authority, but it's really what happened to the Knickerbocker Trust Company in 1907 that touched off the firestorm that led to the creation, well, the meeting at Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, the creation of the Federal Reserve banking legislation, which was signed by President Wilson in December of 1913 and passed into law. Back in the early 1900s, particularly late 1890s, early 1900s, speculation was a huge thing, especially in New York City, among bankers, among bank customers. Inside information about companies was the currency of the realm. If you knew something was going on, or you knew that a company was in trouble, you could borrow the stock and sell it, watch it go down and replace it, and put the difference in your pocket, a short sale, and make a profit on the collapse of companies. Conversely, if you found out that the company was fortunes were going well with some huge contract or some mineral strike or something like that, if you got the inside word on that, boy, you could load up the truck before the word reached the rest of Wall Street and then pump that stock up. And then when you made a big enough profit and you had enough publicity at how great it was and enough suckers came in, you could unload that stock at premium prices and put that profit in your pocket. So a lot of this speculation was very common. The speculative era is one of the reasons that Theodore Roosevelt, the president at that time, was so antitrust and trust busting, because he knew a lot of these shenanigans were going on with these big operations, these big banks, these big super conglomerates. And he knew that the little people were often cannon fodder in these schemes, and they were the ones that ended up being hurt. Well, a famous corner, what they call an attempt to run up the price of a commodity, in this case copper, took place in 1907. And the Knickerbocker Trust Company was supportive of a couple of the guys that the group that was formed to run up the price of copper. Well, when the price went high enough, all of a sudden out of nowhere came tons of copper pouring into the market. The corner collapsed. All these guys were caught short. They had borrowed money to buy tremendous amounts of copper and stock in United States copper and things like that, thinking that they were going to be, ooh, filthy rich. Okay. Quite the contrary. They didn't expect to have a whole avalanche of copper come down on them and collapse the price of copper, ruin the corner in the commodity and the stock, and put them at risk of total ruin. Well, word gets out on Wall Street pretty quick, especially when some people are in big time trouble, right? And the vultures sweep in, right, to pick the bones. And word spread pretty quickly that Knickerbocker Trust Company and its president, Charles Barney, were very much involved in helping this group do its deed of trying to corner the copper market. And people began to worry, gee, I wonder if Knickerbocker Trust Company is going to get the money back, all the millions of dollars they loaned this group to try to run their speculative corner. Well, smart people don't wait. They get in a cab, they get in a carriage, they run down to Knickerbocker Trust Company and say, dude, I want all my money out right now. And this is exactly what started to happen to the Knickerbocker Trust Company. People started flooding the offices, the banking hall en masse to pull their money out. Well, you know what happens next. They're short of money. They start calling in loans from the people they lent money to. And all of a sudden, they got to get their hands on some money to be able to pay off depositors and keep the bank afloat. But guess what? There's nobody that wants to lend them money. Okay, so they've got to literally close the door because they can't make their obligations. This touched off a huge panic, and it began to ripple and spread to other institutions in New York City. It was only for the Knickerbocker Trust Company eventually, and some of the cooler heads on Wall Street, some of the bigger names, the Warburgs, the Morgans, is approaching the House of Morgan, J.P. Morgan, and saying, look, it's either you or we all go down the tubes, okay, because the stock market was collapsing. People were getting hurt. Huge numbers of people were ruined. Finally, J.P. Morgan said, okay, I'll come to the rescue. I'll lend the money to see this through because interest rates have soared to 100% on money, because when risk is high, you need a high return on that money that you're lending, right? It's not a simple loan. Man, you could be wiped out. So you're like, yeah, I got it, but it's going to be 100% interest for that. I mean, you think loan sharking is something? Boy, at that time, when you needed money bad, there wasn't really any lender of last resort to come in and help out. Well, thank goodness the House of Morgan did stop in and the run was stopped. But in the light of that, and then there had already been some movement towards the creation of some type of national banking entity for one other very specific reason too, besides financial stability. And that was the inequity of banking and lending throughout the United States. Now, what does that mean? If you're a farmer doing business in, say, around Kansas City, you're a wheat farmer in Kansas or some Nebraska corn farmer, and you're having problems getting loans because maybe your local bank can't handle that size of a loan for planting season and things like that. Well, those smaller regional banks and associations really had nobody to turn to except the big New York banks and go to them and say, hey, look, can you float us some money so that we can help the farmers do their planting? And there was always this friction between those banking centers, Denver and Kansas City, Texas and Atlanta, all these different areas have totally different demands for running businesses and things like that. And they were very upset that all roads, and a lot of senators and congressmen were upset too in some of these other areas of the country, a lot of the other areas of the country, that everything flowed into the tentacles of New York. And they said, this is not right, that banking is so centralized in New York City, that our smaller banks and institutions here have to, kiss whatever in New York to establish credit lines and be able to make loans of a scale that we're sometimes not able to make here. And when things go bad and we have failure, we need to be able to borrow some money for our bank to keep it afloat so we can survive runs on the bank in case there's a bad harvest or something like that and our loans are in debt. You understand what I'm saying? There's a jeopardy in lending because at that time we didn't have FDIC. We didn't have guaranteed deposits. Everything was just full faith and credit of you and the borrower. Sometimes, most of the time it worked out, but sometimes it went bad. But it kept people very, very careful about where they lent money to because they knew if it went bad and their decision was wrong, they weren't going to get their money back. That went for depositors too. So at that time, banks and trust companies would publish statements in the newspaper of their assets and loans. So to try to keep people calm, right? So, hey, we're in good shape. We got plenty of money no matter what happens. Right, we're the Bank of the United States. We're never going down, which they did go down in 1929. But back to Knickerbocker Trust Company. After the failure, and one thing that happened, they didn't really actually need the Federal Reserve at that time. I mean, it's a good institution to have for stepping in, but as soon as interest rates went sky high, when everybody needed money, gold flooded back into the United States and interest rates came down on their own accord because of the surplus of gold and the ability to lend freely depending on how much gold was in your treasury of your bank or whatever. So things became very liquefied. Within 3 weeks, everything was pretty much back to normal. But the bad taste of the whole experience led to the meeting at Jekyll Island of some of the big time, the Paul Warburgs and the big heads of representatives of Morgan and other banking companies to hammer out the Federal Reserve System with one main purpose, okay, really two purposes, but the main purpose was the next time we have a financial panic or something like that, instead of sitting back horrified that interest rates are going through the roof for short-term loans because everybody's too scared to lend money because they think that the borrower's going to fail and they're going to be screwed, so they're being prudent. So interest rates go sky high and it freezes the whole system. Everything collapses. Suppose we had a banking entity that was funded by member banks that in times of those stress could act like a buffer, okay, to keep interest rates low by being able to lend money into the marketplace. That was a really big move on the part of government to get into that type of business and be the lender of last resort. The other consequence was that there were 12 Federal Reserve offices established around the nation. So no more New York would be the epicenter of influence, and all Federal Reserve banks were equal in their voting power, although New York was designated to be first among equals, precisely because of its location in New York City and its availability of meeting bankers and other things. They're the branch of the Federal Reserve that's charged with doing the money market operations, pulling funds from the market by tightening reserve requirements of banks, demanding that they have more assets behind their loans, etc., or loosening that up, right? So by and large, a very interesting system, and one that you should know the roots of why it was created. Well, now you know. In a future installment, we'll be talking about how the role of a lender of last resort, the principal role of the Federal Reserve, became changed with additional mandates that probably led us down the road that we shouldn't have gone down. I hope you enjoyed this little foray into history with the creation of the United States Federal Reserve System. If you're not subscribed, yes, once in a while we do a little more than just the usual yucks and fun on here. We do delve into some serious but topical issues, of which the economy is certainly one right now. So if you're not subbed up, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for a notification of all uploads, and lastly, please thumbs up the video. Thanks for watching.